everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Stacey. I thought today I would talk about some of the books that I reread the most often. I talked previously about the fact that I've been rereading an awful lot and that I wanted to diversify my reading choices, and that was one of the reasons for starting the channel. But I thought that I'd kind of run through maybe some of the books that I do gravitate back to over and over again, because whilst they're not necessarily good for the variety of my reading, I do gravitate back to them for a reason, and that's because I enjoy all of them a lot. So I thought maybe I should talk about some of them. So first up we have Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. I know that Cat's Eye is not the Margaret Atwood that most people talk about. Certainly Handmaid's Tale is blatantly the one that everyone kind of will have on their list and will gravitate to, and whilst I have no problems with Handmaid's Tale, I've read it a number of times, I enjoy it, it's beautifully written, it's certainly not a comfort read, it's certainly not something that I gravitate back to looking for familiarity and safety and enjoyment. That's not what that book is for me. Whereas Cat's Eye, although it still deals with really troublesome topics, it's about complexity of female friendships and bullying and the impact that our childhood friendships can have on our identity and our understanding of our place in the world. This one has an awful lot more to it in terms of, I don't know, the world that is built around Elaine, who is our lead character in this, is somewhere that I like to spend time. The sort of the dual plots of her art career and her interest in science, I find those really interesting, the way the sort of Atwood weaves them together in order to build this. So I've read this numerous times. This is my battered original old copy. It's all well sort of annotated and scribbled all over, and I think this saw me through A-levels originally, and then it's been read and reread many times since. So that's one that I definitely go back to a lot. Next up, this is, so I mentioned before that I'm a big World War II nerd, and I think if I go all the way back to when I was in my late teens and I started reading World War II non-fiction, I think if I'm honest, this is the one that started it all. Band of Brothers, obviously, and the accompanying TV series, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think I saw the TV series first. They were very closely linked at the time, so I'm fairly sure that I saw the TV series first and then got this and read this in an afternoon. I was in my student digs in Bath, and the landlord was having the double glazing replaced, but it was freezing. It was the start of October, but it was a really cold October, and the guys came to do the windows, and they took, for reasons best known to them, I don't install double glazing, so I don't know how it works, but they took all the windows out in one go and then put them all in at the same time, as opposed to working sort of room to room. So instead of being able to move around the house in order to try and stay warm, it was just freezing the entire place over. So I went and I put hat and gloves and scarf and coat and big boots on, and I went and sat on a plastic garden chair at the bottom of the garden, and I read this. And I read it in, I think I almost finished it in a single sitting, and I loved it. And I don't, have to be honest, I don't have the same affection for Stephen Amorose's other World War II fiction. Citizen Soldiers is quite good, but none of them have the same impact that this does. And I think it's because this focuses on such a select group of people and follows them throughout the course of the war that you become so invested in them, and it breaks your heart when somebody doesn't make it, and you are really pulling for all of them to go home and to be all right and for everything to be okay. And you feel their frustrations when there are supply chain issues and equipment problems and orders get rescinded, and you feel the tension when when they're in Bastogne, and it's just brilliant. It's so good. And I read and reread this. Like I say again, this is a really battered copy. I think there's pages loose. I'm not going to fiddle with it too much. I'm going to need to invest in a new one soon. I'm not a big fan of the audiobook on this, or of Cat's Eye actually. I think when you've fallen in love with a hard copy of a book, it takes something quite special to have somebody else read it to you and not interfere with the voice that you had in your head when you were falling in love with it. So I always read this one in physical book form. I don't listen to the audiobook on this. Next up, again, I mentioned in one of my other videos, like I've been here for ages, like the first one, I mentioned it in the first one, that I read a lot of music biographies. And I think one of the ones that I reread the most often, got terrible lighting today, is this. This is All the Mad Men by Clinton Heylin. This one explores the prevalent incidence of mental illness in male rock stars of a certain era. He's looking specifically at the late 60s and early 70s. And he talks about Who, he talks about Led Zeppelin, he talks about Pink Floyd, he talks about David Bowie, he talks about the Kinks, and he talks about the impact that mental illness had on each of these bands and each of these artists. He looks at, because obviously you have a mix during that time of mental illness that was perhaps triggered by drug use, and mental illness that perhaps was always present, but perhaps was exacerbated by the unusual conditions that being famous and being in a band like one of these bands puts on your psyche. It very much stays in its lane. It does not discuss any women at the time. No female artists are mentioned in this at all, other than if they were related to or having relationships with the men being discussed. And it doesn't particularly broaden its outlook from this very specific time period. But because of that, it benefits from being really focused and a really detailed kind of look. It includes Nick Drake, who I'm a huge fan of, and again, I just think he's a really interesting figure. And it looks, I think when you read a lot of music biographies, you're quite often looking for ones that have a slightly unusual take on the sort of the well-trodden stories. And this does a really good job at picking something quite specific and deep diving into it in a really interesting way. So yeah, I've read this numerous times and I'll go back to it again in the future, lately. As well as those, I have a couple that I couldn't find this morning. They're here somewhere, but chaos reigns. The first one of those is Witches Abroad by Terry Pratchett. Now this is a close one thing, because I could have included Witches Abroad, Lords and Ladies, Carpe Jugulum, Masquerade and Carpe Jugulum, because any of the four of those I've read and reread multiple times. Witches Abroad is my favourite by a whisker. The other three are all amazing, funny, wonderful, clever, intricate stories that I've read and reread over and over and over again. I don't include equal rights in witches as a what have you. I know Granny Weatherwax is in it, but it doesn't feel like a witches book. And whilst I do enjoy Weird Sisters, it's nowhere near one of my favourites, and I have read it, but I haven't reread it. Witches Abroad is the best one. Witches Abroad is my favourite of the Discworld novels outright. Yeah, it's one that I read over and over and over again. I'd read it over and over again if the rest of it was rubbish, but it still had the riverboat scene, because I love that. Granny Weatherwax playing cards is just that. I would visit that scene on my own without the rest of it any day of the week. And whenever I'm feeling a bit down and a bit flat and a bit lost, Witches Abroad is just one of those books that I can dive into and really enjoy, and know that I'm going to really enjoy it, and feel sort of perfectly relaxed and comfortable in that space. And the last one that I wanted to talk about was slightly not the same as Witches Abroad at all. It's a book called Forensics: Anatomy of a Crime Scene by Val McDermid. Val McDermid writes amazing crime thrillers and mystery novels, murder mysteries, and her books are very detailed on how crimes are solved and how the police go about gathering their evidence and identifying suspects and narrowing down the sort of clues that they have in order to work out what's happened. She's really detailed in her novels about that side of things. Sort of thinking particularly of the Tony Hill and Carol Jordan books. So it makes sense that she would have a big interest in forensics and sort of the methods of crime detection and police procedures. And this book is a really good examination of the different methods that police use in order to solve crimes, in order to identify who they're looking for, and to work out how murders and crimes have been committed. And this book kind of breaks down the different disciplines. So it sort of looks at fingerprints, it looks at facial reconstructions, it looks at a fire investigation, it looks at toxicity studies and testing, it looks at what's the entomology, when it bugs, and sort of at what stage different insect life turn up on a corpse. And she kind of breaks down each of these different disciplines and looks at the history of them when they were introduced into regular use by the police force. And she, for each one, gives kind of a case, at least one case study that kind of digs into a crime and looks at how this particular forensic discipline helped solve that crime and helped identify who'd committed that murder. And there's a range of crimes that she talks about. So she talks about P.C. Bezhenivsky's murder in the early 2000s. She also talks about the war crime trials after the Bosnian War in Serbia. She talks about sort of Victorian crimes, and it's really varied. It's very detailed. It's really well written to be detailed enough, but not dry. It doesn't come across like a textbook or an academic study in this subject. It's really well paced and really interesting and really engaging. And I really enjoy it. I know it's an odd topic to be interested in. But yeah, I own that I've got that on my Kindle. I have a hard copy in paperback and I have the audiobook, and I have read and reread that multiple times. It's really interesting, and I return to that quite frequently. So there we go. So those are a few of the books that I have read multiple times. What books do you read over and over again? Does anybody else do this? Anybody kind of reach for something that they know inside out and back to front just because they want something where they feel comfortable and safe and familiar? If so, pop them in the comments. I always love to know. If it's good enough that you feel you want to read it multiple times, then I'm sure I'd like to pop it on my TBR and have a look in the future. Anyway, I hope everyone's all right. I'll see you next time. Thanks.